I need to know everything, who and the what and the where, I need everything. Trust me, I hear what you're saying, but act like it's new what you're telling me. I'm curious, George, I hop in the Porsche, it's 5 on a horse, I'm ready for war, I'm coming for throats, to turn to a ghost, I need to know everything. Now you be surprised at the info you get is by letting them talk, so I'm letting them talk. Gotta keep quiet, maneuver in silence to let them talk.
Hello and welcome to JK Plus One. I am not your host, PTF. I think he said he was in his survivor pool taking the Chiefs to lose. So, we know where he is. I am your host, Jonathan Kinchin, and thank you for joining us. Look, I'm going to be straight up with you and quick. We've got about a 2-hour episode, and it's a little bit of a different path than what you've heard on the first 30, 31 episodes of this show. I lose count all the time. This is a conversation that I had with two dear friends of mine, Laffit Pincay III, as well as Richie Migliori. And it was a conversation that was, I don't want to say inspired, it's the wrong word, but I didn't take school serious enough to know the right word to say inspired. Outside of inspired, the opposite, or not the opposite, but a different vibe. But this conversation came from the unfortunate events of the passing of Avery Wisman, a rider who has recently passed, and there's a large conversation around the fact that in some way contributed the stresses of being a jockey, mental health, and things of that nature. And we wanted to talk about mental health. We wanted to talk about the stresses of being a jockey. And I recorded this after the conversation, so I can kind of give you a heads up of what you're about to hear. We talk a lot about the stresses of a jockey. Laffit obviously being the son of a Hall of Fame rider. Richie being a champion rider in his own right. And we talk about that. But we also just turn into three guys talking about mental health. We turn into three guys talking about therapy. Three guys talking about sadness, depression, alcoholism, addiction, social media. We got a long run talking about social media, the impacts of social media, and that's where we go. So there is some fun kind of behind the scenes nuggets in terms of racing that I know that people really like about the JK Plus One series. But there's also just a conversation about mental health, and our goal with this conversation is hoping that people will either A, seek better mental health for themselves, or B, help someone around them that might have some issues they're trying to work through, and that's what it is, and that's the world we live in, and we wanted to make sure that we brought it to the forefront, and I can assure you that next week we'll be right back to the light silliness. Maybe there is some in here, but not a ton. So that's the warning I have for you here. I want to thank our friends at Qatar Racing for helping us make this possible, and really, this is an episode that hopefully they're proud of being aligned with. It's for the greater good of this world and obviously this game. Want to give them a passive congratulations. I feel like they were probably a little disappointed with Ever So Mischievous, who ran on Saturday at Aqueduct. There was a big story out on this horse, the talent that he had, and came up a little bit short, but came up short with a very fast buyer speed figure. I think the winner got a 91 maybe. So Ever So Mischievous, who got nailed right there, probably got a 90. I didn't look it up. But right there, and really excited. I think this horse is going to appreciate going a little bit longer, maybe needed to start. I feel like this is a stakes horse, so it's going to be exciting to watch Ever So Mischievous throughout the rest of his 3-year-old year for our friends at Qatar Racing. So, like I said, I won't hold you up anymore. It's a pretty long episode. I hope you enjoy it. I hope that it's enlightening. I hope that you'll share it, and I hope that it will impact you at least in some way to either help yourself or help somebody around you. And that's it, my friends, Richie and Laffit. Well, I kind of wish that everyone was around for the pre-conversations about this. So if the pre-conversations are anywhere close to what we give you here, I think that this is going to be one of the things I'm most proud of that I've done on this JK+1. No offense, Richie, with our one-on-one episode. No offense, Laffit, for our one-on-one episode. But two of my dear friends in the world, outside of the professional world, two people that I fanboyed over at one point before I got to be friendly with them, and now I'm at a place where when I talk to them, they ask me how my son's doing. It's a little surreal. Two of my best friends in the world, Laffit Pincay the third, Richie Migliori.
Hey,
you
Jonathan,
don't fanboy anymore? You don't fanboy anymore?
I fanboy over Richie, but not you.
Tends to wear off when you're neighbors in Saratoga.
Absolutely. Richie, good to hear from you.
Yeah, guys, it's good to be here. Talk about some serious issues with you guys.
Yeah, and so let me set this up. I usually record this part of the podcast before I do the intro. So I don't know what I said on the intro. So if I'm redundant, sorry, but maybe I'll just let this live. This is a conversation that Laffit, myself, and Richie thought about having with the unfortunate events earlier this year with Avery Wisman, a rider who passed, and it's been well documented that there's been some. The family is well documented that there were some struggles with the career and what it meant, and it's been assumed. I'll read between the lines. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a journalist either. That there's something that was amiss with the personal life, the mental health as it pertains to that career of being a rider. And, you know, everyone knows Richie was a champion jockey, and Richie's prepared to talk about some of his struggles and some of the things that he went through in his life as it pertains to his career. And then Laffit, who mental health is a very important part of his life. It's had a huge impact on his life. I'll let him tell his story, how it pertains, but also his father being a champion rider as well. He has a different perspective to how that career can affect the rider. And then me as a horse player, that career can affect a human being as a son or as a spouse, a friend, family member. And then for me as a horse player, you know, I've always been one of the horse players that tries to not bash a rider. I try to blame bad beats on my own poor opinion, but we do know that there's mistakes that are made, things of that nature. But I've always felt, and I say it in kind of in a joking way when I'm on the show, but like, I'm not out there risking my life. So who am I to say whether it was a good decision or not? I think it's a very tough career. And I think that as an industry, we should all be aware of the mental and physical impacts that the riders have to endure. And period, enter. I think it's also very important to talk about mental health in this day and age. And I think it's a very interesting conversation between three men, because there's a stigma when it comes to mental health that it equals weakness. And I know we've all been touched by mental health and how it can impact your life. I'll get into it a little bit later, but I think that, you know, I'm not sure my father wouldn't still be here if it wasn't for mental health. So that's the intro to what we're going to be doing. It's not going to be as light and fluffy as some of the shit I normally do. But I think it's an important conversation. Richie, we'll start with you as the guy who's been on top of these four-legged animals more than anyone else. How impactful was your mental health through your entire career compared to a guy that put on a suit and tie and went to the office every day?
Well, it was a struggle my entire career. Even leading up to the start of my career, you leave home so young to pursue something so different and so difficult and really hard to relate to by people that haven't tried to, undertake that endeavor. So I've said this to, people. The saddest, loneliest day of my life was 14 years old in a tack room at Hialeah on Christmas Day alone. Um, went to the track kitchen to have Christmas dinner and then back in my room. Um, and that's just not a natural thing for a young person to be separated from their family on their own, particularly on an important holiday like that. So you already kind of has set the stage for tough times in your life to go through these things to achieve a goal that you have set for yourself and something you want so badly. And in itself is a lonely place to be that young and know what you want and be ready and willing to do whatever it takes to get it. And if that means, you know, being separated from people you love, from being alone, from working from 5 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock at night, which was very much the case when I was under contract. Mr. DeMauro had a farm. I'd be in the barn at 5 o'clock in the morning and be finishing up at his farm at 5 o'clock in the evening. We, after galloping horses in the morning, head out there and work all day. And it was fine because it was a part of the journey to get to where you want to be, but it also is a very isolating kind of a lifestyle for a young person. You're not hanging out with friends after school. You're not going through the normal aches and pains and puppy love and heartache with people your own age that are going through the same experiences. You're cast into an adult world, um, and you don't have that normal upbringing, that normal growing up stage. So it already is kind of set the stage for you're going to be alone and cast into a place sometimes that's just difficult for anybody to handle, let alone a young person who is frankly very ill equipped for it.
Laffit, and look, there's so much there to unpack, and we're gonna dive in deep to all of these things. But at the top of the show, I want Laffit, why is this conversation? Because let's be honest and be frank, you sent Richie and I a message wanting to discuss this, wanting to dive deeper into this conversation. For you, mental health, which is one part of this conversation. The other part of it is the physical and mental obstacles for a jockey. Why is this conversation so important to you?
In the moment and learning of Avery Wisman, young rider, what he was battling, and while I did not know him, this hit so close to home, JK, in regards to my own experience and upbringing. And I don't think it's discussed enough. As Richie so eloquently put, the struggles of a rider. I watched a jockey struggle. As talented as my father was, as much success as he had, like it all came with a steep price. Like hangry is real. All right. He was hangry for 40 years, like starving, literally 650 calories a day. The emotional toll for a rider, the pressure to win. You don't produce, you don't get paid. Like no guaranteed contracts, right? The danger that there's an ambulance out there chasing you around. There's no off season, right? Like unless injured or suspended, you don't have a lot of time to like walk around and clear your head. And I think the bottom line is the life of a rider just isn't typically anywhere near as glamorous as often portrayed. And my mother, who I lost when I was very young, struggled with mental health. My mother's side of the family, generations of severe depression. My mom, aunt, grandmother, like all lost, far too young, by their own hand. And like the reason I'm sharing this, and part of the reason we're having this conversation, is to normalize these conversations, as you mentioned. It doesn't have to be uncomfortable. Like it shouldn't be uncomfortable. We've made like strides in general, but like you said, the stigma surrounding mental health is still part of the problem. By some, still viewed, as you mentioned, as a weakness. Like it's not. How do you change that? I don't know. Not a mental health professional. I'm a big believer in therapy, But I think maintaining an open dialogue, especially these days, given the isolation and division, needs to be a top priority.
So we've gotten the opening statements, as it were, of kind of where we are and what it is we're going to be talking about for the next, X amount of minutes or hours. I think that the one thing that I heard a couple of times, and we talked about from the pre-show situation, which is I think is a great place to start, because this is a horse racing podcast, so we're going to start horse racing, but we're going to let it go wherever the hell it wants to go. Richie, for you, how much of a struggle? We know about the physical struggles. We heard on the podcast we did one-on-one, all your broken bones, and those are a part of the equation, I think, when it comes to mental health, that fear and that knowing that you could lose your life and never hold your kids again at any time the gate opens. But tell us how hard the food part was for you and the weight part, and feel free to go wherever you want to go with that, but tell us how impactful that was in your career.
Well, it was all consuming. I'm a guy who was supposed to be 145 to 150 pounds naturally. I'm 145 pounds now, and people tell me all the time, "Oh, you look like you can get right back in the saddle." I'm over 30 pounds over my riding weight. So, um, you think about food constantly. You don't realize, if you are able to eat normally, how much food is part of just socializing. You go hang out with friends. What do? You eat. You go for a drink. Food is a constant part of it. And having to figure out how to live with the fact that you got to look at food as fuel, not for enjoyment, not for flavor, not just to feed the engine, right? And I didn't realize it at times how, again, hangry is the right word, Laffit, how something would tie me in knots and I couldn't, I just would want to explode on people, and the chemical imbalance of not living on a proper calorie intake at the same time trying to be strong enough to ride 1,000-pound animals and make clear-headed decisions. And um, you know, after the fact, when I was able to eat and relax a little bit, I would go, wow, man, if someone said that to me while I was riding, it would have been a problem. Like, I would have lost, things that would bother me. I don't even know why they bothered me. And trying to find the balance later in my career, of being a father and a husband, you work all day and living on with this unnatural, amount of calorie intake, and then come home and you got to be dad. You can't just, go and, hole up in a room or get under the covers. Your son wants to have a catch. Your daughter wants you to teach her how to ride the bicycle. Like, you know, trying to find that balance in there. And honestly, my children helped me get better mentally, because when I was younger, I would either go back to my room at the track and hide, isolate, or go, the first apartment I had in Elmont, right a mile, half a mile from Belmont Park, a basement apartment. I'd go and hole up in my basement apartment, um, and want to try to go to sleep early so I wouldn't think about food or wouldn't eat. And it gets so crazy that it's even dehydrating yourself. It's not just not eating. It almost becomes a point where, all right, I can live with being hungry. Try to live with being thirsty as well. And people say, well, you drink water. No, when you've gotten yourself down to a level of weight that is so below your natural weight, even drinking water is going to put weight on you. Your body's going to hold on to it. I could leave the jockey's room on a Sunday, 112 pounds. And if I let myself go a little bit, I was 118 on Wednesday morning. And now I got to get back down to 112. So that yo-yo, that chemical reaction that you're going to have is real, and your patience, your perception of things is so altered. And then, like Lafitte talks about, then the constant pressure of it: no season, no contract, don't win, don't get mounts. It's a spiral. And in New York, at one point, there were 4 newspapers every day covering racing. and giving a synopsis of the day's races. So I'd get up in the morning and I'd go to the coffee, shop at, 5:45 in the morning. And if I got beat on a favorite the day before and somebody wrote in the New York Post about it, the guy at the coffee shop, "Hey Mig, what happened there?" Go pick up my racing form at the newspaper store. "Oh, hey Mig, what happened in the third yesterday?" It's constant. You had this constant barrage of scrutiny. You're under a microscope, and even in that in itself is difficult to deal with. You can never hide from it. You can never just be free of a mistake you made publicly. It's between weight, number one, constant pressure, the wear and tear on your body, and the self isolation because of all that. That's when your mental health really suffers because you do isolate. Nobody can understand you. That's the way you feel.
Meg, I want to talk about the inner workings of that. What some of the stressors and how you handled the weight, and then also the isolation. It seems like a sad place to be. I would imagine that there's some solutions to that. Probably not good solutions, but solutions to kind of some of that hurt and pain I want to come back to. But I do want to get Laffit's take on some of the things you said. And I think I don't need to do a whole thing. Hangry, Laffit. What did hangry mean to you?
I think for my father, even if you're doing well and he's riding winners, and much like the kind of success that Richie had during the course of his career, the heights that my father reached, I just don't know that he'll be the first to tell you he didn't necessarily enjoy it. When you're when you're that deprived, it has an extreme impact in general on your mood, as Richie said, when it comes time to interact with the family, when you go home. And then, part of the fun for us guys, like after a big show, we get to spend some time together. We get to have a drink, hang out, celebrate, whatever it might be, maybe at the end of Saratoga. For a jockey, it's completely different. We just watched the Super Bowl the other day. And right after the game, it's like, hey, Patrick Mahomes, you're the Super Bowl MVP. What are you going to do next? I'm going to Disneyland, right? In horse racing, like, hey, such and such, you just won the Kentucky Derby. What are you going to do next? Oh, I'm riding 7 at Belmont tomorrow. It's
Yeah.
completely different. And I think what caught me off guard the most was something my father said to me a few years after he acclimated to the fact that he was retired. I've told Richie before, I don't know that I've met another rider who loved it. And I mean, actually loved it as much as my father, as Richie did. And what they were both willing to sacrifice. Richie wasn't meant to be a rider. Neither was my father. He jammed a square peg into a round hole. He forced it for decades. And what he said to me, because he went through a transition after he was forced to, he still wasn't ready. He was in his 50s. He was still riding well. He kind of had this resurgence late in his career. He had that spill. He broke his neck. He was very, very fortunate to walk away from a sport that he wasn't going to walk away from. That was the irony. It took a broken neck to give him the opportunity to walk away. So after that, I think there was somewhat of an identity crisis. It's not like he picked up the phone and said, "Hey, Laffit, I'm depressed." You could just kind of tell. And he was trying to come to terms with who he was. Because from the time he was 15 years old, he was one thing. He was a rider. Like, first and foremost, now who am I? But then when that wound heals and you look at, for him, life beyond the saddle, and I can go out. I don't have to count calories. I don't have to measure everything. I can go out and have a drink and not feel guilty or not worry about how heavy I'm going to be the following day. We're out to dinner a few years ago, and he says, if God came to me and said, "Laffit, I'm going to let you're going to be on this planet for eternity. In what stage of your life do you want to spend that time?" He's like, I right now where I am right now. This was when he was still in his 60s, late 60s, right now. And I thought for sure, like, he's going to want to relive the glory days, right? He's like, he's never been happier now in retirement, which is what I'm more proud of that than anything he accomplished during the course of his career. Because I know how much, like, yes, he loved being a rider, but I don't think he was aware at the time at how much he was really just grinding and struggling until he got to live life like a normal flippin' human being post-retirement.
Richie, what is? Do you have anything to add to that? Just hearing Laffit say that, I mean, because I agree. I've heard a lot of interviews. I've listened to lots of podcasts. I've talked to lots of riders. I'm friends with lots of riders. I don't know Laffit's father as intimately as he just described, but there is no human on this earth that I know loved riding a horse more than you, and I'm very convinced of that.
Well, listen, thank you both for saying that. I did love it. I loved everything about it. I couldn't wait to get up in the morning and get to the track and get on a horse. I always had that dreamer's mentality that I could walk into the next Seattle Slew, the next, secretary, whoever it might be, affirmed, right? And just that anticipation of that was a wonderful thing. I was not lucky enough or fortunate enough in my life that a horse of that caliber walked into my life, but I enjoyed every part of it. I enjoyed the process of getting horses ready and being a part of the pit crew. I always did better when I rode for a particular stable and I was a part of the team, and they would listen to input. So I enjoyed that part of it. But something Laffit was just saying about how Laffit's dad was the all-time winningest jockey on the planet, and not enjoying it as much. And even though I loved being a rider and loved the riding, I never got as much out of winning, like the personal satisfaction. I was never as happy winning as I was upset about losing. And it was so out of balance. I mean, I actually did go to therapy, and that's something you don't talk about because there's a macho factor of this. Guys in the locker room, you're not going back to a locker room with guys that are on the same team as you, that are trying to pick you up or make you better. Now, you may have guys that are friends in there that's still your competitors. And you can't allow that weakness. You can't allow them to know that, man, I'm struggling and I got to get help. It's just not done. It's taboo in a locker room setting like a jockey's room. There's a lot of macho attitude about it. I think that there was one point Eddie Maple recognized that I was struggling, that I'd be mercurial. If I won, it was euphoria for an instant. If I lost, it was, just depression for a week. And I was a guy who could ride 100-to-1 shot in the Kentucky Derby. And by the time I got to the gate, I figured out 50 ways I can win this thing. And then ultimately, when it didn't happen, I'd be depressed for a month. I took it that hard. But I think Eddie Maple recognized it in me, and him being an older rider and having children probably saw, like, this is somebody's kid, and would try to talk to me about being more even. They called him Steady Eddie for a reason, not getting too high, not getting too low. Something I struggled with. The other thing too is, why do you think and it's gotten better, I believe, over the years, but there's so much issues with dependencies, drugs or alcohol with riders, because you sacrifice so hard to do something that when you do have an opportunity occasionally to celebrate, you feel like there's a certain amount of this is owed me. I'm supposed to be able to let go now. I risk so much. I risk my life. I starve. I spend hours in the hot box. I deal with people that sometimes aren't reasonable. The horses don't run as well as they think, but who's the most visible member of the team? The jockey. So he gets the blame. So there's an entitlement to it that so instead of being satisfied with having a drink or two, it turns into excess. I'm entitled this because I put so much into this that I can let go and do whatever I want and worry about paying the price later. I really think that has a lot to do with why so many riders over the years have had struggles with drugs and alcohol.
Especially when you can't compensate with food. right?
Yep.
So you're going to compensate with something else, whether it's alcohol or stimulants or prescription or whatever the case may be, and that leading to a certain dependency. How do you think that game would have looked on Sunday if you told all 22 starters, you guys are all going to play with the tank half full? We're going to allow you half the calories that you would normally consume before taking part in a game as physically demanding as football. Or in this case, for these riders that are out there not being able to put themselves in the best position to maximize their own potential, to feel best physically. And then after the fact, because you're constantly battling weight, what if you walk into the jocks room, you're riding 8 that day and you feel like hell? You're tired, you're dragging, maybe you're over, you're going to take something to suppress your appetite and give you whatever energy is necessary to get through the day, because that's your job and you're going to sacrifice. And long term, circling back to Richie, what he was saying as far as the dependency and substance abuse that we've this is in all walks of life, but just narrowing it down to jockeys in particular, when you connect the dots, it's not hard to understand.
No, not at all. And it's interesting, the feat what you talked about with your dad and seeing him kind of make that transition and then finally get comfortable with his the riding portion of his life being over. When I first was told I couldn't ride anymore, in that instant I was still in the hospital. I had come out of a really tough surgery. I didn't care at that moment. I actually remember thinking when the doctor was talking to me, like, I don't give a shit. It's done. It's done. I was in so much pain and banged up, and then about 6 weeks later, I started feeling better, and I was home, and we had moved up to the farm, and I started setting goals for myself. I'm going to walk to the mailbox and back. And the first week, I mean, there were a couple of days I had to call Carmela to come pick me up in the car. I couldn't get back up the hill to the house. Then I'm going to walk down to the creek and back, and then I'm going to walk here and back. And I started feeling better, and I started believing the doctors are wrong. I'm going to ride again. And I went to 5 different doctors to try to get an okay, and couldn't get okayed. And I went into such a depression for a year. It was as dark a place as, I mean, the most elongated dark period of my life. I maybe been to darker places, but this was every day felt like just a cloud. I'm not going to do that again. I'm never going to ride a race again. I'm never going to break out of the gate again. And part of that is your routine. You start so young that I lost structure. I knew what my day was going to be every day. Even if it was difficult in making weight, I knew what I had to do every day. I was going to be at the track by 6. I was going to be in the jockeys room by 10:15. I was going to be there, ride all day until 5:30. I was going to go home and I was going to eat 4 ounces of fish and a salad. And not having that structure, it's you lose something in that too. And the jockeys room, not you had that place to go. And for me, it was a sanctuary. I could have the worst argument with my wife. When I went through the threshold from the jockeys room, it was like a snake shedding one skin and another. She would get mad. I'd go and win 3 or 4 races after we had a big argument. And she's like, "You didn't even think about it." No, I did not. As soon as I went through that threshold, I was in my safe place. I nothing else was mattered, or I thought about nothing else. So losing that routine is a huge part of it. And it just took me a really long time. And I had to start looking at it different. I can't say I'm never going to do that again. I'm not going to ride horses today. It's almost like how a recovering addict handles things. I can't look at it like it's never going to happen again. I'm just not going to ride today.
All too familiar, Richie. And JK, my father had that spill his last ride, undercard of the Big Cap, March of 2003. He didn't clear out his locker at Santa Anita until opening day of Del Mar the following year in 04. The thought of getting his locker out of there, cleaning it out, his foot locker, was too much. It was a year plus. He went opening day Del Mar because he knew nobody would be there to get his stuff out. And at the time of his accident, and when they detected that he had multiple fractures in his neck, But that he was, I mean, for all intents and purposes, he should have been in a wheelchair. And there isn't a day I don't think about that and how fortunate he is that he's not, running around like Benjamin Button out there, reborn post retirement. But at one point he told me, he says, if I didn't have a family, and this, Richie made me think about this when he mentioned this, JK, he said, if it wasn't for you and your sister, if I didn't have a family, and at the time he was in the process of getting a divorce, he's like, I'd go back. Even though he was told the next time you go down, you could wind up in a wheelchair, or the wrong kind of hit, the wrong kind of spill could kill you. Still, he's like, if I didn't have a family, I'd go back and ride without hesitation. And this is a guy who rode for 40 years in his mid-50s.
There's no question in my mind that if Richie didn't have Carmela and his 3 kids, he'd be riding still. 100%.
Yeah, no, listen,
he'd have blown right through that stop sign.
Well, I said something the other day to somebody, and it sounds ridiculous, and I it's like a yogiism. This is a migism. I said, because I was told on the no in certain terms, if you go down, you're gonna, because of all the hardware, you're gonna break above or below the plates, and you will be a quadriplegic. And I said this, and I know it's going to sound ridiculous, but I hope you guys know in the vein it's coming from. I said to somebody, I said, if I knew like I could go back to riding, and if I had a spill, normal injuries, break a leg, break an arm, whatever. I said, or even get killed, I could live with that. I could live with dying. I said, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but the point is that the thought of being a burden and having people that I'm supposed to take care of have to take care of me is just unacceptable. And obviously, intellectually, it has to end someday. You got to let it go. But in your heart, you feel like it could go on forever. And I'll tell you this, Laffit, John Milano, my valet, packed up all my stuff. I rode for just short of 30 years, 29 years, missed 37 months from injuries. My trunks with all my equipment, my saddles, boots, pants, helmets are up in my hayloft. I've never opened them. That was 2010. Those trunks have never been opened. I can't bring myself to open them.
All too familiar.
I have a box from when I coached. I look through it all the time. I think it's a different commitment, and I think that's the important part of like this conversation. Is the commitment. Richie, you touched on something when you were talking about therapy. What pushed you there? I would imagine the way you grew up in Brooklyn on your own, basically since you're 14, crying. You had mentioned you'd cried yourself to sleep one night when you were 15 because you thought someone was breaking into you were a child. I can only imagine Austin 3 years from now being in a place by himself. He just wouldn't be able to handle it. You're obviously a tough person. You're mentally tough, physically tough. The shit you endured throughout your career. What pushed you to therapy? What made you, and at what point of your career did you make that decision to see someone to talk about it?
I have to give all the credit to my wife, Carmela. And blessing would not be the person I am, or maybe even be here if it wasn't for her. We became very close friends early on. I married her when I was 21 years old. And she recognized, that I was struggling even more than normal. And it kind of came to a head one day when I had won 4 that day and got beat a nose in the last race and did not ride a good race. Should have won. And in my mind, I'm exposed. I'm not a good rider. I was fooling everybody all day. That race defined me. And when I got home, I was in a foul mood. And she was like, but you won 4 and you won the stake. I think it was the Better Roses. And I was like, yeah, but did you see the last race? I said, everybody saw I'm not a good rider. I'm not, and I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. And she came down to the living room at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm watching race tapes and just going back over it and back over it. And she urged me to start seeing somebody and talk about a lot of unresolved issues, a lot of things that I carried with me from childhood. And, how it impacted my confidence, and the fact that I would think that, and this is obviously stuff that I learned more about myself and dug into in therapy, was why I would think one race would define me. Why that I would always look at the negative, or something that went wrong, was, you see, that's who I am. That's not, that people would outwardly maybe see somebody successful, somebody that, wow, lead rider, whatever. And I wasn't satisfied with that. I was always finding the negative. I was always finding why I wasn't worthy of something, why I wasn't good enough for something. And so that was a huge blessing there. And I hope you guys don't mind. I'm going to go off in a little bit of a different direction along the same vein, though. After I lost the bug, I was really doing bad. I was in a bad slump. I had bought my way out of my contract. Things weren't going well, and I had one filly that I was working that could really run, and it was like really counting on her to kind of help get me going again. And I was galloping her every morning for a particular trainer, and the trainer told me she was ready to run. We're going to enter the filly, but you have to go to the Meadowlands on Saturday night and ride this other horse for him. And I said, no, but I can't, because I have to go. I'm in my brother's wedding party. My oldest brother was getting married. And the guy told me if I didn't go ride that horse, I couldn't ride the filly that I was galloping every day. So I went to my brother's wedding. It was a night racing at Meadowlands. It was the last race. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I stayed for part of the reception. I left and drove to the Meadowlands in the pouring rain to ride a $5,000 claimer. Horse ran up the track. Guy told me, okay, you got to blow the filly out in the morning. I was at his barn 6 o'clock the next morning, blew her out. He made the entry. He didn't put me on the horse. And she won by 8. And I was in my basement apartment in Elmont. I walked home. I was packing. I was done. I can't believe people could treat you like this. And I literally was packing, and I was going to go off and live in the mountains. I was going to be a hermit. And about 7 o'clock that night, there's a knock on my door, and it's my girlfriend, Carmela, who's my wife now. She knew what had transpired and started talking. I cried. We talked. We were up all night. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, I was either going to put my boots on and go to the track and go to work, or I was going to quit. Well, I put my boots on and went to work. And I attribute the strength that she gave me and staying with me and talking me through it. And, for me carrying on, because I was done. And that trainer, it was like I had Tourette's. Every time I saw that guy, like I'd pass him on the horse path, I would just go off and call him every name in the book. And years and years later, I'm fighting for lead rider. My agent came to me and said, hey, this guy wants us to ride some horses. He got some live horses. And I was like, he could bring Secretariat back from the dead. I won't ride for the guy. Ultimately, I wound up riding, but I told there were ground rules. I'll ride the 4 horses for him, but he can't say anything to me. I don't want to hear no instructions. Don't say hello, nothing. I went to the paddock. He started talking to me. I said, you're going to need a rider in a second. And I won on all 4 horses. I was lead rider, never rode for him again.
Oh my God.
But if it wasn't for Carmela then, I might not have ridden anymore. I really was, because you can't believe that someone could do that to you, that you sacrificed so hard. You go to your brother's wedding and don't eat, don't drink, and leave early to go ride a horse. I think that speaks to just where your mindset is, how bad you want it, but also, that isn't always going to be repaid in kind. That hard work doesn't necessarily get you where you need to be. People have to give you an opportunity. And I talk to young riders all the time. You don't know when an opportunity is going to come. The only thing you can do is be prepared for it when it does and make the most of it. And understand that people are going to disappoint you. You can't control other people's actions. But again, you're young, you're ill-equipped for it, and you're blinded by your own passion and the goals you've set.
Richie, let's bring this back a little bit to the event that kind of got us in this direction of this conversation. When it comes to someone like Avery, who was riding kind of the smaller circuits, that he was not riding it He wasn't, riding for Baffert in grade ones in Santa Anita. He wasn't on horses for Todd at Gulfstream, and he certainly wasn't on horses for the Chads and Lindas of the world in New York. You spent the majority of your career riding in New York, where if you were to have success, you would be rewarded for that success financially and also just like socially. Tell the listeners the difference between the struggles that you went through at the highest level versus the struggles that a lot of these guys and gals go through at those tracks that we even have punchlines about. Charlestown on a Wednesday night. What a sicko betting that. Talk about those lower level riders and how much worse their situation is than what you went through, considering the stage you were on.
It's infinitely harder for guys, men and women riding on, lower level racetracks. You're not riding the cream of the crop. You're riding horses that often have physical infirmities. There's certainly a lot of them, mentally. I talk about horses mentally and physically. Mentally, just aren't as easy to handle. They're not, the Cadillacs, if you will. And they're not riding for headlines. They're not riding for fame and fortune. They're riding to put food on the table. They're riding to support a family, to pay rent, to make their car payment. Which is one thing when you have success on an upper echelon circuit, that's going to come. I never rode for money. I never set out to be a jockey because I can make money or have a car. It was a true passion. But one of the trimmings, the accoutrements to that is that you are well rewarded. So it's a completely different kind of pressure when if you don't win races, you're not going to be able to buy your kids school clothes or you're not going to be able to pay the mortgage. I mean, I don't know what it's like to ride with that hanging over your head, but I have so much admiration for riders that are doing it again to make ends meet. It's a living. It's not, what I experienced as far as being in New York the majority of my career.
Laffit, your father obviously always rode at a pretty high level. When it comes to, I think there's a couple of things. I think there's a couple of ways people can cope with some of the stuff that Richie mentioned when it comes to the stresses of weight, the pressures of winning, the obstacles of the probably less than dependable type of people you have to deal with sometimes in racing from a loyalty standpoint. How did your dad, as much as you feel comfortable sharing, how did he kind of cope with it? Was therapy ever a thing for him? Was it substance? Was it, and also Richie, be thinking about this too. We've talked, I don't know if really you had a lot of issues with substance, but Laffit, how did your dad handle, a lot of these stresses?
He would fall into that, like therapy, way too macho for any of that. I think he'd be the first to tell you. And certainly earlier on in his career when he was younger, and we lived in a completely different time when mental health was not discussed, when therapy, going to see a psychologist it was just associated with being, completely nuts. And fortunately, we've come a long way since then. He was quiet. He would keep everything kind of to himself. Early on in his career, I think there was a lot of experimenting with different, whether it was supplements or stimulants. The key for him was, how can I feel my best, most energetic, strongest in the saddle, while not being able to fuel myself properly with food. And through a lot of trial and error, he in his book, he talks about his temper when he was in his 20s, and a lot of that having to do with stimulants he was taking at the time, experimenting with, and then maybe going out and at that time maybe having a drink, and what that would result in, this fiery temper that he had, where it would take very little for him to snap. And at some point, to his credit, recognizing, I can't live like this. Like, I'm good. Like, this is not sustainable long term. And I'm, couldn't be prouder of the fact that he figured out a way to maintain his career for decades and doing it properly, having recognized, it would have been very easy for him to become completely dependent on one substance or another. So it's not like he's, always made the right decision and stayed away. Like, it was trial and error. This doesn't work for me. I don't like who I am. I don't like how I feel the following day. I'm hurting people close to me. And it's having an impact on, he was, as much as he was winning, he was a man. He wasn't a happy individual, and later on matured, started making better choices and figuring it out. But you could, again, it's very, doesn't take a lot of imagination to understand why so many, specifically in this profession, will fall into that hole, never really to be seen again, as far as recovery and figuring out the right way to go about things.
Before I get to you, Richie, on that, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about just my feelings in that arena, right? My dad did not have nearly the stressful job that your father had, Laffit, and Richie, the job that you had throughout your life. But he did have a stressful job. He was a car salesman, and he was a very successful car salesman. He did really well. I never really needed for anything. And, that Friday morning, hey, Dad, can you send me 1,500? I'm at school message always was answered with a yes. But I do think that when there is a stressor as a career, when you get out of the situation in which is stressing you, which is my dad coming home from work, or Richie, you getting home from the track, and Laffit, your father getting home from the track, there was always something to turn to kind of release. And Richie said something that I never really thought about. It's like, you feel like you earned it. And shit, I mean, you probably did. In fairness, it might not have been the best thing for you to do, but if someone earned the right to have a drink or two or six, it's probably the person who did the career of a rider, and probably someone who is a commission-based worker. But I realize now that my dad's gone, that he was numbing something. He was numbing, whether it was the stress that he wanted to numb. You know how it is when you're stressed out about something. You have a couple of drinks, suddenly you're not thinking about that thing anymore. So you get that kind of break of having to think about it. And I would imagine as a rider, whether you went on you lost a couple of races or you're hungry as shit, having 3 drinks, suddenly that kind of goes away for a second. And so, it makes sense why substance is such an issue. And so many top riders we know of have struggled with that. And Richie, as close as we are, and we've had conversations, we never really talked so much about if that was a huge part of your career, if you found yourself with that being a huge obstacle.
Well, alcohol, yes. And drugs, never. I'll be honest, I was always afraid of it. I remember being at a party and somebody, had cocaine, and, guys were, and I left because that always scared me. I had never any desire for it, but alcohol was the thing. And I remember the first time that I started recognizing it as a kid. We were at Hialeah for the winter. Again, I hadn't even turned 15 yet. And Walter Kelly's horse won the Widener handicap. And, we were in the same barn. We shared a barn with them. And they had a big party. And it was something that I remember that dawned on me that night, that, wow, when you win, everybody's happy and they celebrate, and they, who had beers and this and that. And then seeing guys, when a horse lost that they really liked or something, drown in their sorrow. So it's a little bit of that culture, right? Like you win, you celebrate, you lose, you drown your sorrows. And I went through stages with it. There were a couple times in my career as a rider that I would drink too much. and I was numbing pain. Uh, Obviously, the evidence stuff, the stuff of uh, the pressure of the job and starving and the entitlement, and then why was I never content with 4 victories and getting beat, on one, and that was the one that defined me. Well, you know, the way I grew up, I spent a lot of time hiding. My father could be volatile. The area I grew up in, I mean, I would hide in the stairwell of the apartment building just to not get a beating, whether it was from inside my house or outside my house. So you tend to self medicate and try to relieve yourself of these feelings. And leaving home so young, why did I leave home? So I couldn't wait to get the hell out of there, right? So you carry a lot with you. And again, the macho part of this is just bury it, bury it, bury it, until I couldn't bury it anymore. And there were periods in my career I wouldn't drink for years on end. I mean, I went probably 4 or 5 years, never had a drink. And then I got to a point where, well, I could sometimes and not others. It was a winding road for me. I sometimes it was no good, and sometimes it was okay, and sometimes I just couldn't do it. I drink now, but it's different. It's not like I'm trying to get to a place and feel better about something. I like to, have a good meal and drink good wine, but it's not to take me to a destination or to run away from something. It's a completely different thing now than it was at periods of my career. Drugs never, but alcohol has been an issue.
Richie, as far as drugs, and obviously there's no reason to do any names or anything like that, but as your time as a writer, just I think the audience probably wants to know, just in a general statement, you know, I think it's a different game now. I think the room now is different than it was back then. And I could be wrong about that. You got guys like Irad and Jose that, like, I think I saw Jose with a Corona one time on the boat. Like, I don't think he drinks at all. I don't think Irad drinks at all. I think that they go home and they play video games and hang out with their family, right? But I think
Yeah,
back in the day, there was probably a little bit more of a kind of a bad boy party guy vibe in the 90s, the 80s. Just kind of drugs in the room, not in the room, but just drugs from riders in general. If we're talking about mental health and addiction, and obviously the Chris Antleys of the world, like, you can't skip over it like it doesn't exist. What were some of your observations as it came to drugs? Was it cocaine? Was it what did you kind of see throughout your years?
yeah. I mean, listen, I tended to keep very much to myself, but the drug that was prevalent was cocaine, amongst the guys that had issues with it, and obviously Chris being one of them. And the difference, and I think the room is extremely different now than it was then, and it's not nearly as prevalent. Um, nobody would talk about it. You knew a guy wasn't right, and you'd still be riding with him. And really, what should have been going on was, hey, wait, that guy, I don't want to be out there with him. And I got busted up bad because Chris dropped himself. The first time I broke my neck, Chris fell in front of me. He walked away, and I was on the sidelines for 7 months, right? So, but you still wouldn't say, "Hey, that guy was messed up." There was almost like an unwritten code that no one was going to, rat on somebody else. And even though it might have been best for them, if you had, as well as the people around, it's a dangerous job, made even more dangerous. So, but cocaine was definitely the drug that seemed to be the most prevalent because, again, if you're reducing and you're pulling weight and you're not eating properly, well, isn't that a performance enhancing drug? Isn't that something that's going to give you a little more energy, make you a bit stronger in the finish? I mean, I would assume that's why guys gravitated towards that. Again, like I said, I was always afraid of it. I never messed with that.
Laffit, I want to talk a little bit more just about mental health in general, but as we're on this rider conversation, um, when it comes to the weight thing, which look, there's lots of pulls in lots of different directions when it comes to the riders and their mental health and what they were going through. But one of the things I've always just thought about is just like it's not even so much. I think the maintaining of the weight is always was always a hard thing, and Richie will let you talk about this too. But it's like when you're in that situation, when you show up and you're 4 pounds over, like getting to that appropriate weight when it's time. I've seen riders jogging around the turf course at Saratoga with trash bags on at 9:45 on a Saturday, and I think to myself, like, shit, that doesn't seem like an optimal way to get ready for the races.
Well, and you know what else is going on underneath those trash bags? You're wrapped in saran wrap after you've rubbed your body with salt and Abilene oil, so the salt helps draw more fluid out of your body. So, or you're in the hot box skipping rope in 160-degree heat, again rubbed with salt and Abilene oil. You know, the difference too now, like you talk about, the culture's changed and a lot, and thankfully so. You'd walk in the jocks room your first day, and this was how they did the guided tour. All right, here's the hot box. This is the dry room. You come in here to break out. You go back in the steam to do this. If you can't get all your weight off in the hot box, go to the masseur. He'll wrap you in a rubber sheet and put the heat lamp on you after he rubs you with salt. There's this guy can get you diet pills. Oh, if you have to eat, this is the flipping stall. So when you're done eating, you can go in here and throw up. I mean, that was your guided tour. Oh, that guy can get you water pills if you need Lasix. He'll get, and most jockeys room have taken the flipping bowls out. The time spent in the hot box is a lot more monitored. So I think they've definitely tried to promote a healthier approach to this, which wasn't the case, at least when I started the early 80s. But, and again, listen, people hear this and say, well, they had a choice. They wanted to do it. Yeah. Yes and no. You know, riders start like thinking about it so young that you haven't formed enough of a mature approach or mind to kind of weigh out, like, what is this going to do to me long term? How is it going to affect me, health wise? And it's almost like the career finds you a little bit. And someone once told me this, and this is a good general statement, that most top jockeys and top boxers don't come from affluent families. And here's an opportunity, and particularly for a smaller than average, man, to elevate himself, to get to a better place, to be able to make a living and get out of a neighborhood or a country that's impoverished.
So one of the things I want to do, and we spent a lot of time on it, and we'll obviously probably come back to it a lot. But one of the things that we all kind of discussed we wanted to do here was, this is a racing podcast. We wanted to focus on the impacts of mental health in racing, specifically as it pertains to the riders who in my opinion, have the heaviest lift when it comes to mental health, with the things they have to deal with, more than trainers, more than billionaire owners, broke owners too, and gamblers. So, I just want to kind of start, and I'll turn to you, Laffit. I just want to start with, like, look, mental health is a thing that's always been on my mind. Like I said, my father was an alcoholic, which, to me is a version of that, and mental health. And like I said, he was always kind of running from something. And ultimately, I don't think I've never obviously said anything like this before on the air, but like ultimately, like my father, he had gotten himself so far into a hole with alcoholism that we had to basically kind of put him in the hospital. And when he was in the hospital, he contracted COVID, and his doctors and we all believe that COVID, because we know it's a circulatory situation, led to him having a stroke, which ultimately took his life. But it's like I thought to myself, thinking about this podcast and thinking about it in general, like, if it wasn't for the fact that alcohol stayed a part of his life. If he would have found a way to numb the stresses or handle the stresses of being a commission based provider, or if he would have, found a way to figure out some of his family stuff or his failed marriage stuff or some of the things he felt like were his shortcomings, if he would have found a way to kind of take that edge off, to numb it differently, which is exactly what I think he was doing. He wasn't like a get wasted guy you can't figure out. He just used to kind of like numb his shit. And he never ever thought about therapy. We just never, even like when we say it in passing, he just was never interested in that, never interested in any kind of like rehab situation or going to meetings to talk about it. And I think that's has to do with him being a man. I think it has to do with him being, from his generation, of not wanting to get help. And it's something that I've always encouraged my friends and family to do. Get help, talk to somebody. It's one of my favorite things to do is talk to my therapist. And I sometimes I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I'll just make him listen to me for an hour. And I'm like, are you still there? It's just having someone non-judgmental listen to you talk about your problems in a clean way. It's something that has had a huge impact on my life. Laffit, I know it has for you as well.
I'm a big believer in therapy. I also feel very fortunate. I had an opportunity to spend some time with you and your father not long after you and I really met and became friends, but just to hang out with him one evening in Hot Springs after I think we covered the Southwest together. As far as therapy, I don't think the answer to everyone's problem is like on a stranger's couch. I don't think the answer to everyone's issues is in a prescription bottle. But I know for me personally, it's made a massive difference. And I've been in different stages of my life. And the reason being, obviously, when I lost my mom as young as I was, everyone close to our family had told my father, Laffit and his sister Lisa they need to talk about this. And kids express emotion through, there's a lot of drawing. I visited my therapist from when I was 9, 10, 11 years old, when I was in my later teenage years, and looking at the pictures and things that I drew, I was like, man, I was pretty messed up. Thank God I was in therapy from that point forward as a child, as opposed to bottling all that stuff up. Not that you necessarily are ever going to heal completely from experiencing something so traumatic, but from a very early age, I saw the positives in therapy. And I think in having this conversation, you have to be careful. Those that have been in therapy sometimes come off as though they think they're therapists, right? And a little bit preachy. And I don't think that's what we want to do here. We're not medical professionals. We don't have the education in terms to like pretend we're therapists. But what I have learned, experienced, and really healthy coping mechanisms, a big part of this conversation has been coping mechanisms. Some of them not so good for you, lead you down a rabbit hole. We've discussed substance abuse, addiction. This is much more of a positive way to engage what your problems might be, and continuing to discuss them and trying to pull at that thread to remove that stigma of mental health. That's still, even though again we've made those strides, but still, when your buddy calls you and, hey, how you doing, man? Well, I tested positive for COVID a couple of days ago. I have a flu. I have a cold. There's no shame in that. But your buddy calls you and like, hey, where you been? I haven't heard from you. I've been having panic attacks, man. Or I've been, I just been depressed as hell, and that's why I haven't been in work the last week or so. That isn't as comfortable of a conversation to have. And that goes back to the association with some sort of a weakness stigma, which is why this is still not in a dark corner, never to be, referenced, but we're still in the we're definitely not there yet. And to continue the narrative, to maintain this conversation, to have it in public is important. Something tragic happens, much like we just experienced with Avery Wisman. The news cycle moves so quickly. It's like you address it, and in the page is turned. That's just where we are as a society and in general, unfortunately. But if nothing else moving forward, if anyone listening who's dealing with some of these things, who's a little bit embarrassed to discuss it for whatever reasons, understanding that there are so many people out there who deal with the same issues, the anxiety, the depression, so on and so forth. There's safety in numbers, and it makes it feel that much safer when the conversation is a little bit more in the forefront than it generally is.
Richie, there's a 0% chance that anyone listening has I'm just kidding. I mean, there's obviously someone, but you grew up tough in terms of, you'd mentioned on your dad being volatile. We've had intimate conversations about your relationship with your family, you leaving at such a young age at 14. I mean, dude, 14 is young. When I was 14 years old, I'm thinking about what I was doing. I was like trying to make out with some girl behind Chili's. You know what I'm saying? Like that's young. And the fact that you were just kind of thrust into this adult world when you were that young, and then you'd already kind of talked about. So let me back up. You were thrust into this adult world. You were forced to be tougher than the average bear. So when I say that, I'd be shocked if someone listening here was tougher than you when they were 15, 16 years old. And I say that loosely. I know people go through their own things. But my point of bringing that up is, and you had mentioned that Carmela kind of was the one who pushed you, that gave you the courage to go and to talk to someone. Were you resistant? And as someone who was so tough, how was that first experience for you to kind of maybe someone who's listening, who has their guard up about that, who thinks they're too tough or too macho to do this? Could you tell us about your experience, about what it was like that first time that you went and talked to someone?
Oh, I was very resistant. I think I was insulted. Like I can handle my own stuff. I don't need someone else to help sort me out. And it took coaxing and conversation, and then I said, okay, I'm going to give it a try. And I'll be honest with you, the first probably month of going, I was BSing. I wasn't going anywhere near the stuff that was making me unhappy or uncomfortable with myself. I wasn't going there. I was totally BSing or thinking I was BSing the therapist, and normal stuff that everybody goes through, uh, and I can remember when I realized that I'm not BSing this person at all, and they're just like methodically trying to draw me out. And when I started really talking, really letting the things that I had buried so deep for so long start to come out, it was hard, but I remember feeling so much relief that first time that I was actually real, when I actually started talking, when I actually started to be truthful. And it was draining. I was exhausted. It was emotional, but I also felt relief, and that feeling of relief outweighed any of that uncomfortable discomfort, I should say, of sharing things that I would never share with anybody about anything. But it took a little while to get there, and then obviously over time. So for me, I just think you have to be honest with yourself, and honest enough that you really talk, you really say what needs to be said, what's going on inside of you, what you feel, and it's difficult. It's difficult, certainly for people to ask for help and say it, but maybe conversations like this, unfortunately, because of situations like Avery, if we get enough people, like Laffit said, talking about it, and you know what, quietly reaching out to people that you see struggling, not forcing yourself on them, just letting them know that you're there, that you care, that hey, I've been to some dark places, I've been to some tough places, and you're not alone in whatever you're feeling. And if you ever need to talk, I'm here, or you need some advice, or just people like to know other people care. And maybe sometimes sharing that you've had struggles will make them comfortable enough to say, yeah, you know what, I am struggling. We'll go back a little further. Michael Bay's rode with him at Hollywood Park. He was riding great, and I could see how hard he was struggling with so many things. And I would try to talk to him. We'd walk out of the jocks room at Hollywood Park to the parking lot, and just talking to him like he was a little brother or something, and just never could quite reach him, and then a year and a half later he's gone. It's evident when people are struggling, and even though, like, you're in a locker room setting in our particular case, you got to try. You got to let people know that you're there, and that you do care, genuinely care. And you're not trying to exploit that they're they're weak and or have an issue. Not that they're weak, that they're struggling with something. But that's the way it's perceived in a locker room anyway. So I know Eddie Maple was a gift like that for me in some spots, and I tried to reach Michael a few times. I just wasn't able to, but I think that's a big step in yes, it's out in the open, but it's certainly not in the sunlight.
There's a lot there, Richie, and I'm so glad you brought it up. Going back to first and foremost, just being honest. We lie to ourselves. Even in therapy, you lie to your therapist, or you shield them from how dark things really might be. If you're a people pleaser, you want to tell them what they want to hear. You want to tell yourself what you want to hear, your loved ones, and you get really good at concealing these things. And therapy is completely pointless. Talking about it's completely pointless unless you're honest. And once you recognize that, you get to a point that, okay, I'm depressed, or this anxiety is killing me, or whatever it might be, coming to terms with that with yourself first, and then having a strong enough support group, those around you, your family, your friends, a therapist, to being completely honest with them. It's not going to work. You're wasting your time. It's not going to work otherwise. And reaching out, just checking in on the people around you. You're right, Richie. Sometimes it's really obvious when people are struggling, and you feel hesitant because you don't want to cross a line and maybe make things worse potentially. Sometimes you can't tell. Sometimes everything looks just fine on the surface. So take the time, check in with your friends, check in with your family, just make sure everybody's good. Like, just because, it doesn't say I suffer from depression or anxiety in somebody's freaking Twitter bio, like, doesn't mean everything's okay or as it appears on the surface.
No, I mean, I completely agree. And it's like, you got to think, right? And this is, and I hope this person's not like listening to this in like in a weird way, but like, you got to think that someone had some interaction with Avery and we're like, man, my man's not doing that well. He seems like he's kind of going through it. And, I have a friend who, look, I'm just going to be honest. I have a friend who I was very close to, but then, we just kind of had some like ups and downs, some kind of hiccups. And like, this conversation inspired me to reach out to them today. Like I just wanted to, we had like the last time we talked, it was like kind of a beefy talk. Like, well, I don't know, dude, you did it. Well, all right, well, cool. I mean, whatever. Like, like we're cool, but we're not as cool as we were, and we'll move on. That was how the conversation kind of ended. And he's just going through something, man. Like someone very close to him. He lost someone very close to him. And then and he's kind of struggled and with mental health in general. And like today, I just felt like I needed to like just say something. And I was just like, yo, you good? And it came back with a lot more emotion than I was expecting because he was going through it. And you can sense that with people that are in your lives that they are going through it. And I think a lot of times, like, you know, like you said, Laffit, you don't want to seem like you're sweating somebody, like you're, you know, hey man, you good? You know, it's like, it's almost like it's insulting to ask someone if they're good.
Yeah.
But you just never really know, like when they needed, like, you know, when they needed that kind of that little push.
They might not even realize they're good. What we're doing right here, even if nobody's listening between the three of us, this is therapeutic. Just blowing it all out, acknowledging these things, that they exist, that you're dealing with certain struggles. We all do. We all get so wrapped up in our own bullshit. It's really easy to kind of lose touch, and especially with those around you. And this is why acknowledging and just having a simple, honest discussion can go so far in terms of maybe an hour and a half, whatever it is. Like if I'm done in a therapy session, or when you finish up, JK, and you know, like I thought whatever was bothering me before bothers me a little bit less now than it did then. And that, even if it's a half a step, is progress in the right direction.
But Laffit, you just said something that is the crux of it. Being able to see outside yourself, be outside yourself, be aware of the people around you, whether you're very close with them or you're not. But having that ability to be aware of that and just make yourself available. I mean, we all have to do that for each other, whether you're good friends with somebody or an acquaintance with somebody. It means a lot just that people know that they're thought of, that someone cares. And it doesn't have to be in an intrusive way. It doesn't have to be, forced upon. Just say, hey man, how's it going? Are you good? And if a conversation could go someplace that someone goes, man, at least someone else is aware or just cares, just caring.
Yeah,
goes a long way, just like consciously or even subconsciously, that knowing even one person fight, whatever, it goes a long way and makes a difference, knowing that somebody cares enough to just check in.
Yeah, and the other thing about it too, like a sneaky kind of like, sneaky handicapping tip here on JK plus one. I've always felt that like one of the best ways that you can encourage your friends and family and people around you to share with you is like if you share with them. Like, so like if you have a friend you're worried about, like you might not have to like sweat them, like, hey man, what's going on? You good? But like sometimes just like reaching out to them and sharing, giving them an intimate moment, like, yo man, like I'm just like kind of going through this thing, or like I got, man, like, this time of year is always tough for me because of my dad, and whatever it is, like sometimes you sharing with them can kind of open the door for them to then feel comfortable sharing with you. Sometimes they feel like they owe you, like, oh shit, man, like I gotta say something now, like, but that's the thing. Like I don't, it's funny, and I feel it's probably different, I would say, for Richie, and because his generation's just, his son and I aren't that far off in age, right? So it's like,
are you saying I'm old?
Richie, I didn't say that. I didn't say that at all. I didn't say that at all. I'm just saying
me.
I'm just saying you're older than I am. You too, Laffit. even though you have that beautiful skin and you're always so well dressed. I feel fortunate that I was like, I'm in a generation where it's like it's like a lot easier and cooler to like share your feelings and to like be like, yo, I'm feeling a certain way. I feel very grateful for that. So it's not, and I'm like an overshare. You ask, like, Jovanina like wants to fight me half the time because I'm like, hey babe, you want to talk about this? Like, I'm definitely an overshare, and that probably has to do with my mom taking me to therapy when I was like 9 when they got divorced. But like, it's still like even my generation, it's not it's still just like, it's weird. Like people just don't want to, they'll tell you all about how they got this, I got this I got this growth on my foot, but they don't want to tell you that they're sad about something.
But you see,
There's something very, I guess, healthy and empowering to feel comfortable enough to share vulnerability. When you're in a good place with you, this conversation's a lot easier. Like, yeah, I don't know why, but I've been depressed for a couple of weeks, or man, my anxiety's been making it really difficult to sleep. And then I kind of spiral in X, Y, and Z. The better of a place you are with you, it's much like, and guys, we've had this conversation about the impact of social media, for example, and that everyone with a flipping account, every Yahoo has access to everyone, whether you're talking about the jockeys in the room or celebrities or athletes, artists, whomever it is. The guy that costs the linebacker for the Cincinnati Bengals, who had that late hit and penalty that might have cost the Bengals a trip to the Super Bowl. You don't think at some point, as he's sobbing on the sideline and now he's injured as well and the season's over, he's not thinking about going back to his locker and having to look at that phone and read 10,000 tweets from these guys telling him what he did wrong, as if he doesn't already know it. That makes it that much more difficult. I'm glad, Richie, I'm glad my father didn't have to ride in the age of social media. That I don't think that would have gone very well for either of them. Everyone having that access. But again, when somebody criticizes you, when somebody has something negative to say about whatever, it was something where you're insulted, whether it's on social media, whether it's from somebody you come across, whatever it might be, you'll notice, depending on where you are with yourself, will reflect, how it impacts you is a reflection of where you are with you. If you're in a shitty place with yourself, if you're in an insecure place, if you're battling, if you're struggling, if you're depressed, whatever that person, whatever they have to say it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt more. Because maybe subconsciously you think there's some truth to it, as opposed to when you're right, when you're good, when you're confident, when you're in a good place, the entire world can tell you you suck. You don't give a shit. You don't care, because you know where you are. You know you're in the right place. You know, like, you're wrong. And it bounces. You're like bulletproof at that point. And that all goes back to that's where I can get a gauge as far as my own mental health, is how much outside influences that I can't control, how they affect me. If something tears me to shreds, like, dude, Laffit, you're not in a good place. If I don't give a rat's ass, it's because I'm in a healthy, positive.
This is great, Richie. I want to get to you on riders and social media. To kind of bring this back a little bit to racing, but I know you've had some social media battles as well. But one of the things I want to say, because Laffit, it's funny, I forgot about it until you just said this. But like through social media, like as I started, when I was on the show, and I had I had 110 followers when I walked into whatever bad hotel that was that the NHC was at. Yeah, that's a shot, NTRA. Treasure Island. When I walked into that horrible situation, and I had that big day where I had 2 entries in the final table, and I went from 110 followers, 70 of which were probably people who I had met when I was kind of hanging out with my brother while he was on tour, who's a big DJ. I didn't have any followers. I was just a guy who's a fan. And then after that, I started to get more followers. And then as I got onto the Fox show, more followers, so on and so forth. But I had to kind of learn how to handle social media, because social media is tricky. And Laffit, we sat, you probably, I don't know, it's funny what you remember with people that they probably don't remember, but it was so impactful to you, is, 3 or 4 years, 2 years ago, as I started to kind of, be more prominent on the show, there was that situation that most people who followed our network for a long time know about, where Ken Rudolph and that the Barry Spears guy started like coming at me with the like not black enough thing. And it was a weird situation because my father, I lost my father, and it was like those two idiots saying things that was just them two, but I was so like charged by it. And I've always been, and anyone who knows me or sees me or whatever, they probably already can kind of tell, like my whole life, I've just been the guy, you say something, I'm going to say something back. And the chances are it's going to be more clever than what you said. And I win. And I just was going to do, like my instinct was to kind of do that. And I did. And I engaged with those two idiots for a long time about that, for too long. Even off air, like texting back and forth with Ken until finally I was like, yo, kick rocks, my guy. Like, you're good. Enjoy your time on TVG, and you're welcome that you don't wear a tie anymore. It's because I was cool enough to not wear a tie, and now your bosses are letting you not wear a tie. You're welcome. But we sat down Laffit one time at Salivo on the patio, just you and I outside, and you said to me, if a homeless guy walked up right now and told you that you were ugly, what would you do? I was like, wow, I would ignore them. He's like, well, why do you give people on Twitter so much attention? Why do you argue with them? And why do you engage with them? If it was real life, you wouldn't do so. Why do you do that? And I couldn't give you an answer, but I stopped doing it at that moment. And social media does this weird thing to you where you feel like the opinion of one or the opinion of two or the opinion of three is the opinion of everyone. And it can really, run its toll on you, whether you're on TV or you're just, a guy who's got 300 followers and you like to talk about racing and you say something one day and then 4 people tell you you're the stupidest person in the world. That's just 4 people. And it seems like on your ratio of 300 versus 4, it seems like a lot. But man, I had to really work through that. I talked to my therapist about social media and talked to my therapist about why do I feel the need to respond? Well, why do I have to respond? Why if someone says something, do I have to pop back? Why do I, why do I have to block someone if they say something? Why, but like now, all I do now is I just mute people because I don't want to give them that satisfaction of, that's how I can get over it. I don't want them to feel satisfied that they've scored on me. Then I don't have to respond to them and I just let it go. But man, it was a huge battle for me at first that I had to kind of work through. And Richie, I know you got off once because of someone just being ugly and ridiculous about your family. And then you came back and most of your tweets are positive. So I know that you probably get a lot of like annoying shit in the comments. Like, social media, how do you work through it?
Well, it is difficult, and I am a guy that I'm sensitive. I mean, whether I show it the right way or not, I tend to be sensitive. The reason I got off it was I'm taking a shot at my daughter, and there was nothing good going to come of the way I was going to react, and I just the heck with this, and I got off of it. But I like it. I enjoy the engagement. When my thing now is if someone is incessantly negative, I block them. I just don't want the negativity. I think that you could discern the people that are just always going to be opposite of the stance you take and inject that negativity, whether it's to be annoying or to get a reaction or just to be, an asshole. So if I see somebody's just a negative person and with constant negativity, no use for it. Goodbye. Um, it's not easy though. I try hard not to engage on that level at all anymore. And maybe, like Lafitte said, maybe I'm just in a better place. This wasn't on social media, but I got a rather nasty text from a high-profile bloodstock agent the day after the Eclipse Awards. I felt Epicenter deserved 3-year-old champion. That's my opinion. I just put more stock in his resume, despite the fact that he had only one Grade 1 win. I thought he ran in the most important races, and his form all year carried through. I thought his Travers was a tour de force. I thought the Eclipse voters got it right. I get this nasty. I don't even really quite understand the insult, but it was obviously an insult. And I just texted back. I'm really not quite sure what that means. Obviously, it's some sort of insult to me, but I wish you nothing but health, happiness, and prosperity. And that's it. Like, if I'm going to get upset because you felt compelled to be nasty with me, then we're going to have a lot of problems with a lot of people over time. So just, hey, you know what? I wish you the best. Live a good life. I know where I've come from. I know what I've been through, and I know where I am. So, that's what you strive for, right? To get to a place where those kind of comments do roll off your back, or slights, or what could be perceived as insults. You talk about the generational thing. My generation did not. You insulted me, we got a problem, right? I grew up like in the Godfather household. You never tell anybody outside the family what you're thinking, and you keep your friends close, but your enemies closer, right? Like, but I think that's a great point, Lafitte. It's a reflection of where you are at and how you're doing, how you handle those things.
You imagine Michael Corleone in 2023 with a verified Twitter account.
He's going to the mattresses.
Yeah, maybe Luca Brasi could have seen it coming. Like, you sleep with the fishes, man. It doesn't take a lot of courage to love insults and anonymity. And I'm sure you've had that experience, that there are certain Twitter tough guys that, man, like big fouillons when it comes to expressing opinion or attacking someone, whether it is anonymity, whether they are doing so from an account of which their identity is revealed. In most cases, probably saying things to someone that they wouldn't say face to face, where there actually might be different consequences. It's social media. And again, this is not the most popular opinion, and this is also a generational thing and a hill I'm willing to die on. But it's like one of the greatest oxymorons in like the history of great oxymorons. It's more isolating and antisocial than it is social. It's really more about social comparison. The media part, this is where the truth goes to die and where false narrative becomes reality, unfortunately. And I think if we do an honest study and observe, and it's bipartisan, not to go in a political direction, but like, why in the 2020s did Americans start hating each other? Was it a politician? Was it COVID? When you connect the dots, I think at the nucleus will be social media, in terms of why we're so divided. The isolation, like I said, more social comparison than anything else. That's like more of the macro, and not to go too far off on a tangent. The micro, and bringing it back to this conversation, and some of the emotional, mental challenges for riders in the social media conversation. Richie, do you think social media, how do you think it impacts, or how do you think it impacts performance, mindset for individual riders, knowing that this is always kind of hovering out there, and that if you make a mistake, there's like thousands of people who are going to let you know about it, as if you don't feel bad enough already?
Well, that's the thing. You know yourself. You know before anybody else the mistake you made, before they know the mistake you made. So then it's just piling on and making somebody feel worse about it. I think the only way I can maybe answer this, and it wasn't an era with social media, it wasn't an era with Twitter and all this. When I was riding well, I just didn't care what anybody thought. I just I would do what I did and live with it, and it was okay because I was in a place, in a good place, as you talked about. And so much so, even owners, trainers, they give you instructions, and in the moment, now that's not going to work here. We're doing this, and however it turned out, I was good with it. When I wasn't riding well, or I wasn't in a good place, uh, everything said was magnified. Or worse yet, you would make that split second, maybe, what if, it's too late. That moment's gone, in the midst of a race. Um, and most of the time, that hesitation would come from the criticism you thought you would get if it blew up on you. That move you instinctively wanted to make, you didn't make. So I do think it can inhibit instinct, and it's a job that is reliant on instinct. You need to be able to react without being encumbered with other people in your mind. And it's a little bit, this is off script here, off, in a different direction, but it's a little bit like numbering how many times a rider can use the crop. If you're got to consciously think about that, you're inhibiting instinct. Sometimes a horse goes to do something, and in that moment, you know what you have to do to get their attention. But that split second, you go, oh wait, I can't because I got to use, I've got 5 strikes and I can't use it up right now. It's too late. The horse has already ducked out or propped or did something that other people can't see visually, but you can feel instinctually. So I think if riders get too hung up with the whole social media aspect, it's going to inhibit their instincts.
I got stuck on mute. It wouldn't be a In the Money Media podcast if I didn't get stuck on mute. It's funny, like I've always said that I feel like the paces in New York. We talk about the paces in New York being, the turf races. We always hint to it that they're just looks like they're going to be these meltdowns that never happen. Someone goes 49 to the half. I think social media is part of the reason that happened. And one of the things that kind of made me realize that was a horse, kind of a lightning rod of controversy, and Hidden Scroll. A lot of people thought he was really good. A lot of people thought he wasn't. But I remember that Florida Derby when Javier Castellano, or excuse me, the race before that, the Fountain of Youth, when he went really fast and got beat. The pace was monstrous, and he got beat by a horse by the name of Code of Honor, right? So you go too fast, and Code of Honor
interrupt. Was it Javier or was it Joel?
It was Joel then, but then
Gotcha.
Joel then, and then Javier comes back in the Florida Derby and tries to walk the dog on the front end, and Hidden Scroll gets run over. Now, Hidden Scroll never turned out to be the horse that we all thought he was going to be. But I always felt like in that moment, the reason Javier did that is because Joel got annihilated on social media for going too fast. And look, I try not to pay attention to it, but if someone starts tweeting about all the favorites that I'm picking, which I have a completely logical explanation for that, if you're wondering, don't tweet me. I'll explain it to you one day in person. There's no nuance to Twitter. But when you start seeing something a lot, no matter what you do, it makes you think about what you're doing. It makes you question it, because we live in a world where there's a bunch of humans around us. And when a bunch of them start telling you something about yourself, you really start to kind of say, damn, I don't know, is this right? I mean, there's 100 people telling me this, and I'm saying that I was right. Maybe I'm wrong. And I feel like Javier walked the dog that day because he saw the abuse that Joel got for going too fast. And I think that in New York, what happens now, because these riders are so engaged, Louis, Irad, Jose, Joel, Johnny, all of them, Kendrick, Manny, I feel like, why take the chance to go 46 to the half and worry about getting off and letting the trainer yell at you, the owner yell at you, and 300,000 of your closest friends yell at you on the internet? Why the hell would you not just go 48? And if you get beat, the horse wasn't good enough. And I feel like, and look, I'm not trying to make it all about the most important thing in the world is racing and the paces in a 1.5 mile turf race at Saratoga. But what I'm saying is that social media in general convinces us that things are more important than they are. And it also convinces us that we're wrong when that actually might not be the case.
People are more afraid to make a mistake in general if it's in the public. It lives forever. For, I don't know, broadcasters 25 years ago, somebody could drop an F-bomb and somebody at home watching on a living room looks to the person next. Did they just say that? There's no way. Somebody just said. and you just move forward with DVR, with social media, this stuff. Every consonant is measured. Every mistake lives forever. And I think in some cases, playing it safe, playing not to lose as opposed to playing to win, not wanting to take enough chances because Big Brother's always watching, whether it's, it's there consciously or subconsciously. And I'm just glad growing up, being a kid is hard enough. I'm glad I didn't have to go through high school as like weaponizable as social media is for bullying and that kind of thing. I'm glad I'm glad I didn't have to do so. And for parents raising children now, as if that isn't difficult enough, what an unbelievable challenge that must be when the parents realize that, Kim Kardashian has as much influence on your kids as you do. All of the different social media platforms, and trying to raise a child to be a good person, to do the right thing, to make the right choices must be harder than ever.
Well, guys,
Richie.
you got to let me adjust a little bit of this, because first of all, Laffit, I'm just glad I didn't have to go through high school at all. The other thing about it, and this is where like I got to really be careful and not respond on social media, just the things you're talking about, Jonathan, with people interjecting, why didn't he go faster, why didn't he go slower? People need to look at things bigger picture too. Again, jockey being the most visible part of the team is going to take the brunt of criticism, just like they're going to take the majority of credit or get the majority of credit when a horse wins a big race. But look at how horses are trained in New York. Every trainer wants their horse to go off the first quarter in 25 and come home the last quarter in 23. So they're training them to run the way they run in the afternoon. And compound that with the fact that every trainer wants to micromanage and put a headset on a rider and tell them in the morning when they're working a horse how fast or slow they're going. So they're not giving these people an opportunity to develop the clock in their head and keep it tuned, so that when you're working a horse without someone in the ear going, okay, you just went the first 8th and 12 and 3, you can feel what 12 and 3 is. You can feel what 12 is. You can feel what 11 and 4 is. So trainers wanting to micromanage so much, I think, are inhibiting a generation of riders from developing the kind of clock in the head that every rider had in the 70s and the 80s. I remember towards the end of my career, I'm working a horse with John Kimmel. He's a dear friend of mine. Comes out with a headset. I took my helmet off. I handed him the helmet. He said, "What's this?" I said, "Why don't you work them yourself too? You can't make riders. You got to let guys do their job. Don't micromanage so much." And the public needs to be aware of the fact that, hey, horses are trained like that in New York. I got to California. The first horse I worked in California, I went off in 25, came home in 23, thought it was a great work, got yelled at. What was that? Was something wrong with the horse? Why'd you go so slow early? They train to make them zippy and go fast early. So it's a bigger picture. It's never just one thing. It's usually a confluence of things that creates these situations.
It's funny you say that when it comes to like some of the trainers. Yeah, some of them by nature are probably micromanagers. But the other thing too about that, like in someone like John's defense, is like, when he's got 3 owners that mean the world to him and his operation, and they start becoming more quote unquote knowledgeable because of social media, because of someone saying the horse worked poorly, the horse worked backwards, all these things. It's a big circle of a bunch of people that don't know what the hell they're talking about, saying they know what the hell they're talking about, and then influencing other people in how they do their business, right? It's like, and that's the one thing that like I've just tried to get better at is like, man, I've played this game for a long time. I've thought about it for a long time. I know what I think is important. And if they come to me with 30 seconds to talk or 45 seconds to talk, I'm going to do my best to be entertaining and to say what I think I can in the 45 seconds I'm given. Now, you cut out Maggie and Acacia. You tell Laffit to shut up with his feature. I'll tell you all about how to efficiently bet the pick 5. But it's not a good show. And it took me a long time to like, not that I ever complained about that, but it took me a long time to like realize that like the 7 people on the internet that made fun of my pick 5 tickets aren't important. And it messes with me. It still does mess with me. I'll tell our producer sometimes, like, Ev, man, like, I don't, Bobby T, don't make me do a pick 5 today, man. I don't really have a strong opinion, and I don't want to spread in this leg. And the reason that I'm saying that, I'm being very honest with you, is because I don't want to listen to the 7 people on Twitter talk shit that I hit the all button in a sequence that I'm not even playing in real life. And like, thank God our producers like allow us to not do that. But the problem is that social media and the outside influence, it's not even our influence. It does impact the way that you think. And I'll use this as a story just to kind of wrap. Something I haven't really talked about a whole lot because it was like, I didn't want to seem like it was sour grapes, but it had a pretty big impact on me mentally. And something I talked about in therapy and something that I worked through a lot. And I'll encourage you to kind of wrap this mental health conversation up the way that you see fit as well. But like, I guess it was about a year ago when that whole NHC thing happened, and I was, in Florida, I was supposed to be in Vegas, blah, blah, blah. But like, that night I was frustrated. I was annoyed. I was upset. I was defensive because I knew that everyone, I was already seeing people start tweeting and saying, oh, cheating, whatever. And I started, and I tweeted that night, and this is like kind of what helped me change some of the shit I do social media wise. I tweeted that night, I'm done being nice or something. Like whatever. And the insinuation was that I was going to like let out all this stuff. And the idea in that moment, which was like, I felt backed into a corner. And so I was fighting back and I was popping back, which is what social media does to us. It makes you feel like you have to defend yourself. Because this public forum, there's this thing that's happening. And it's not just me, right? It's like a woman who posts a bikini picture with her friends and some asshole in the comments says, do some sit-ups, honey, or some shit like that. Like there's this need to then look at his page and make fun of how fat he is and point out the fact he's got a lot of nerve. But it's a cycle of like really pulling you down into this moment. And I said that I was going to say all these things. And then the next morning I had to wake up with the reality that like, the world like thinks I was cheating, and then making sure I don't say the wrong thing. And then having to worry about people like saying I shouldn't be able to work on the show anymore. And all these things. And it's like, social media is not that important, and it's not the real world. And if you allow it to be that, it will really, really, really take over your mental health, and it'll affect you in a lot of different ways. It'll cause you to act out of character. It'll cause you to do things and to worry about things that you shouldn't worry about. And, if it wasn't for my career, like what I do, I think I'm at the point of my life where I wouldn't have it. I really wouldn't. And it's because I just take a lot more. I put a lot more stock into the people around me and things that really matter, like raising my son, maintaining the healthiest possible relationship I can with my ex-wife and my son's mother, and having the best relationship I can with my fiance and my in-laws, and trying to have a better relationship with my mother, and trying to have great relationships with my friends, and like shit that really matters, that really is at the end of the day, like my mental health, like what it is that makes it easier to get out of bed and what makes it easier to sleep at night and all these things. And it's like, man, it's the reason I feel like I'm as far as I am, which isn't as far as I need to be, is because I have tried to take a step back from what really matters in the world in terms of social media and other things, but also really focusing on sharing and talking and saying things out loud and talking to someone else and talking to friends and talking to a therapist about the shit that's on my brain so that I can get it off of my brain and try to have a healthy and happy life. And I just want to encourage everyone to strive for finding happiness within yourself, and like do whatever you have to do, and don't be scared to take those leaps into darkness.
Well said. We can't do our job like without social media to an extent. You can't always be the last to know every time something important happens. It's just not realistic. there are great things about social media and bringing awareness and to this cause that we're discussing, charities, fundraising. Like, it's not all bad, and I want to give like that particular impression. But just keep in mind, and to just follow up on what you just said, if it's that important to you to begin with social media in general, that needs to be looked at. And the more you're impacted by the opinion of those on social media, how much it affects you, that's what you need to look at. Why is this bothering me so much? That's an indication of where you are with yourself. It has nothing to do what anybody else is saying, but the impact on you is going to give you a better idea of where you're at. Maybe you need to take a little bit of a closer look within.
They all great points, guys. One thing I would say to kind of wrap this, this whole conversation up with is care about each other, be in the moment, be present, pay attention, and don't be afraid. Be brave enough to ask for help if you feel like you need it. Maybe that's the act of bravery you need to get yourself where you need to be, or at least step in the right direction that way. But it all begins with looking out for each other.
And look, I usually kind of wrap these things up like, I just say goodbye to you guys, and then I kind of do this little like minute thing at the end. But I kind of want to do that minute thing now with you guys here. But, I think the point of this conversation, to kind of wrap it up, and I'll also say this at the beginning so that people know what they're getting themselves into. I think we wanted to, with what happened with Avery Wisman, we wanted to touch base on the life of a rider, because it is such an important part of our game. This game doesn't happen without these riders and the sacrifices that they make physically, mentally. And, these three people on this show, especially Richie, are big believers in, and both of you guys, Laffit as well, have reason to be this way. But I'm a horse player, full on horse player. And that's how I got into this game. But I do get frustrated when, as fans and as horse players, we're unfair to riders. I just want this conversation to maybe let you think a little bit more about the next time you get snapped in a pick 5 and you want to jump on Twitter and blame it on IRAD. Yeah, maybe it was IRAD's fault, but IRAD also got your ass home in the first leg. So let's just maybe pull back a little bit on that and understand that they're humans that are really kind of going through something. And not to downplay what you're going through, but likely their lives outside of the financial portion of it are just as hard or harder from the things that they have to overcome and the mental stresses of that job. And then the other part is, like, we wanted to just normalize the conversation about 3 people talking about mental health and talking about dark moments in their lives and things that were going on. And the reason we wanted to do that is because you see Laffit's face, you've watched Richie ride, you've seen my face, and we wanted to kind of bring that to a situation to kind of let you see people that you've seen talk about things that you didn't think maybe they would talk about. And our hope is that that someone who's listened to this will call a friend who's struggling. Someone who's listening to this will log on and grab some healthcare, mental health care. I don't give a shit. I'll tell you, I've used this thing called BetterHelp. It's like an online deal. They sponsor podcasts too. I should have hit them up for this one. They're not sponsoring this one, but you play it. You're online and you just have you FaceTime and you just talk, and you can do it from your phone. I've done it driving before, which is probably illegal in most states, but there's easy ways to do it. You don't have to even necessarily do that deal where you go into someone's office and, like Laffit said, lay on some couch, which is kind of fun to do. To be honest, I've done that before too. But
Jonathan, can I interject?
Yeah, sure.
Something?
Absolutely.
Obviously I'm going to gear it towards riders, but I think this is in general. Like, as a rider, when you're doing well, a lot of people are around you that maybe don't have your best interests at heart. They seem to kind of come out of the woodwork. And then when you're not doing well or you're in a slump, I'll speak for myself. I tended to withdraw, and I felt like I was letting everybody else down. I was disappointing people. And then people that actually do care about you stop reaching out because they feel like they don't want to be a burden to you or infringe on it. Infringe, reach out. Somebody had a bad day. Somebody blew a race. Somebody blew a catch, a block, whatever that if your friends reach out. Hey man, know you had a tough day. I'm here. That's it. Just that they know you care, because the more isolated you get, that's where you fall into that hole that's harder to climb out of.
I love it. So if you've made it with us on this hour and 50 some odd minute journey, we appreciate you taking the time. If you didn't need this conversation, but you listened to it, we appreciate you. If you want to, but maybe it'll help you tell a friend who might have needed this conversation, or, hey, check this thing out. These guys talking about this stuff. And we encourage you to talk to your friends and family about all of this. It's an important part of life that we all deal with in one way or another. And like I said, we appreciate you joining us on this journey. And Laffit, Richie, you guys know I love you to death, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to talk about this very personal topic.
Same, brother, and to both of you. It's a safe place to have this conversation. I appreciate both of you. And along with your listeners, just thank you to both of you. Really much appreciated. And if this conversation made a difference to one person, as cliche as it sounds, it's well worth it.
Well, I love you guys. I can't wait to see you again, and look forward to a good summer with you.
Fellas, I really appreciate you guys taking the time. Thank you, everyone who listened. I don't think that this episode really needs to have a whole long, drawn out. I think it kind of stands on its own. Thank you, everyone, for the support. Please share this one as well. There's all the other ones as well, but this one in particular. We wanted to do this because we wanted someone to hear it that needed to hear it, or we wanted someone to hear it that needed to help someone that needed to hear it. So we hope that this message got across in the right way. I want to thank everyone involved with the network. You know who you are, PTF Drew, and everyone else involved. I'll save the silly goodbye for another time. Thank you so much for joining us this week. And if you need help, get it. If you know someone needs help, give it to them. Take care of each other, and we'll see you next week.
I need to know everything, who and the what and the where, I need everything. Trust me, I hear what you're saying, but act like it's new what you're telling me. I'm curious, George, I hop in the Porsche, it's 5 and a horse, I'm ready for war, I'm coming for throats, to turn to a ghost, I need to know everything. Now you be surprised at the info you get is by letting them talk, so I'm letting them talk.